The frost clung stubbornly to the wooden fence posts, crystals catching the first gray light of dawn and turning the paddock into a field of muted silver. The wind was thin, carrying the faint tang of hay and the distant smell of earth that had long surrendered to winter's grip. Across the cracked soil, the rancher moved slowly, boots sinking slightly into frozen mud, hands shoved deep into the pockets of a threadbare coat. He breathed in, watching his own vapor curl upward, and for a moment he let himself imagine the farm as it had been. Years ago, lively, full of sound, the sharp rhythm of hooves on packed earth, the warm hum of the barn. But now silence pressed from every corner, a quiet accusation that whispered of neglect, of doors left unlocked, of hay spoiled in the loft. He paused by the edge of the paddock, eyes tracing the uneven line of fencing, the splintered wood, the sagging gates. A small stack of bills sat on the table in the cabin behind him, yellowed paper edged with dampness from the morning mist. Letters from suppliers, reminders from the bank, the faint threat of foreclosure, all waiting like ghosts he could not escape. He glanced toward the barn. Its doors hung slightly askew, wind whistling through the gaps, carrying the faint echo of past summers when the horses had stampeded through the field, their coats glinting under the sun. Those days felt like a different life, belonging to someone else entirely. A clatter from the road beyond drew his attention. The wheels of a small trailer rattled over frozen ruts, carrying a shipment of horses. He stepped forward, squinting through the gray light. One of the crates was marked crudely in fading ink. Rejected, unsellable. The letters scraped across the rough wood like nails against stone. He frowned, feeling the tug of something familiar and uncomfortable, an echo of the times he had been forced to choose practicality over mercy. When the trailer door creaked open, a shiver ran through the air, not from the cold, but from the animal inside. The horse emerged hesitantly, a scraggly creature whose coat was patchy and dull, ribs faintly visible beneath matted fur. Its ears flicked nervously, nostrils flared in the chill air. Eyes, large, round, wary, met the rancher's, and for a brief, suspended moment, he felt a flicker of recognition. A kindred spirit, broken in ways that mirrored his own. The world had discarded it, labeled it worthless, just as life had often done to him. He studied the horse, noting the scars along its flank, the slight trembling in its legs, the way it shifted weight from hoof to hoof, as if testing the ground, testing him. Every instinct in him urged caution. The farm could not bear another mouth to feed, another body to shelter. And yet something deeper stirred, a quiet insistence that he could not ignore. The wind carried it, or perhaps it had always been there, a voice that refused to be silenced. The horse took a tentative step forward, then another, nostrils quivering in the cold. The rancher extended a hand, not commanding, not pleading, merely present. The creature stopped, ears pricked, eyes wide, and inhaled slowly, measuring him. Breath mingled with the morning mist. He could see the pulse in its neck, the shallow rise and fall of ribs, and a low, almost imperceptible whicker escaped it. He exhaled, feeling the weight of years pressing into the space between them. To turn away was simple, practical, expected. To reach out was uncertain, demanding, costly. Yet as the horse's gaze held his, he felt the stirrings of something he had almost forgotten. Responsibility, and perhaps hope. A small, fragile step forward, from both man and beast, sealed the silent accord. He would take it in. He would feed it, shelter it, see if trust could grow where neglect had reigned. The wind shifted again, carrying a faint promise through the frost-laden air, and he realized the farm would never be the same. Nor would he. Some lessons come only to those who refuse to give up. And for the first time in months, as the horse cautiously moved to the edge of the paddock, following the rancher's slow, careful steps, he allowed himself a small, tremulous hope that what was rejected might yet be redeemed. The sunlight was weak, slanting through the barn slats and pale, hesitant streaks that fell upon the dusty hay floor. Dust motes floated lazily in the beams, disturbed only by the quiet movement of the horse as it shifted from one hoof to the other. Its coat caught the light in dull patches, uneven and coarse, the thin hairs bristling where frost had lingered. The rancher watched from the doorway, hands resting on the rough timber frame, breathing slow and deliberate, as if each inhalation could steady the fragile bond forming between them. The horse's eyes, dark, round, alert, tracked his every motion. It sniffed the air, nostrils flaring in the scent of straw, leather, and the faint, lingering smell of human sweat. The creature's body tensed, muscles taut beneath the thin coat, every flick of an ear or twitch of a leg a silent question. The rancher knelt, careful not to appear threatening, and offered a hand, palm low, unhurried. The horse's gaze flickered to the movement, then back to his face, measuring, hesitant, searching for honesty in the quiet rhythm of his breath. He brought a bucket of water and set it down gently, the metal clanging softly against the wooden floor. The horse took a cautious step forward, hooves tapping softly against the boards, and lowered its head to drink. Its ears twitched at every distant sound. The wind through broken windows, the faint creak of barn timbers, but it drank, slow and deliberate, each sip a small act of trust. The rancher stood beside it, still, letting the silence fill the space between them. In that quiet, he felt a strange kinship, a reflection of his own years of watching, waiting, hoping for a moment of safety in a world that had been indifferent. He began to clear the stall, moving the soiled straw into a corner, raking slowly, methodically, speaking in low, even tones. "It's all right," he murmured, though not for the horse's sake alone. Words had little power here. The presence mattered more than sound. The horse stepped around him, cautious, yet closer than before, its breath steaming in the morning light. The tension in its body eased fractionally, a small acknowledgement of shared patience and restraint. By mid-morning, the first hint of warmth kissed the barn's interior. The horse ventured outside, halting at the threshold, hooves sinking into thawing earth. It lifted its head, ears forward, nostrils flaring at the scent of hay, the smell of the rancher, the cold tang of air. The rancher followed slowly, keeping distance, hands visible, his shadow stretching long across the paddock. Step by step, the horse moved forward, tentative but deliberate, testing the trust forming in silence. He noticed a small wound along the horse's flank, crusted but not deep, a mark of past neglect or perhaps an old accident. He knelt, letting his hand hover briefly before touching the coarse hair around it, watching the creature's reaction. It flinched, yes, but did not bolt. Each soft exhale from its nostrils, each tremble of its muscles, spoke volumes. This was a creature that had been rejected, labeled unworthy, yet here it was, choosing cautiously to engage, to accept presence without pretense. As the hours passed, the rancher gathered feed, set out fresh hay, and spoke softly to the horse, telling it the rhythm of the farm, of the day, of life that had not ended despite hardship. The animal followed him tentatively, ears flicking, nostrils quivering with curiosity, each hesitant step a small bridge across the gulf of mistrust. And in those moments, the rancher felt an echo of something he had long thought lost, the quiet affirmation that patience, kindness, and steadfast presence could pierce the walls of fear and neglect. By evening, the horse stood in the center of the paddock, eyes brightened, coat catching the soft amber of fading light. It was not yet whole, nor fully trusting, but had chosen to stay, to move forward, to meet the world on uncertain terms. The rancher, standing a few feet away, felt the weight of decision in his chest. Practicality demanded restraint, survival demanded caution. But his heart, careful and patient, recognized the small truth forming in the frost-touched air. Some bonds, once formed, are impossible to undo. And so, as twilight stretched across the farm, the horse took its first steps toward the barn without hesitation, and the rancher followed, knowing that this fragile beginning held the promise of something neither of them could yet fully understand, but both would soon depend upon. The winter wind had sharpened overnight, slicing through the gaps in the barn walls and carrying with it the faint scent of distant livestock, hay, and wood smoke. Inside, the horse stood quietly in the corner of its stall, coat beginning to soften under the careful feeding and slow grooming of the rancher. Yet a restlessness had begun to settle over the farm, subtle but insistent, like the low hum of a distant storm. The rancher sat at the small table in the cabin, a ledger open before him, but his eyes were drawn instead to the stack of papers that had arrived the previous day. Letters from the breeder, shipping manifests, and invoices bearing official stamps. The markings were precise, but the message was unmistakable. The horse had been sent here in error, a mistake in a system that valued profit over life. He traced the lines of the documents with calloused fingers, reading and rereading, the letters cold and bureaucratic, stripped of human concern. One invoice suggested the horse had been destined for a more prosperous farm, one capable of caring for it as intended, but that farm had refused it, labeling it unfit for sale. Another note, hastily scrawled, implied the creature had been deemed unsightly, a blemish in a world obsessed with perfection. His stomach tightened at the thought of the horse's journey, the rough handling, the abandonment, the loneliness that had carried it here. Outside, the horse shifted nervously, ears twitching at every creak of the barn. The rancher stepped out into the pale sunlight, scanning the ground where frost clung stubbornly to every blade of grass. He crouched to inspect the hoof prints leading from the paddock gate, worn and uneven, a quiet testimony to the creature's struggle. Each step, each mark, told a story of resilience, of small courage in the face of repeated neglect. And with each observation, the rancher felt the weight of responsibility press more firmly upon him. That afternoon, he made a cautious call to the breeder, voice measured but firm, asking questions that had no right to easy answers. On the other end, a disinterested clerk offered only vague excuses, a recitation of policies and liabilities. No one spoke of care, of the horse's well-being, only of inventory and profit. The rancher hung up, hands clenched around the receiver, a mixture of frustration and determination coiling tight within him. He could not undo the past, but he could insist that the present be just. Evening arrived with a gray heaviness, and the horse had begun to explore the paddock more fully, nostrils flaring at the crisp air, hooves crunching frozen earth. The rancher observed from the fence line, mind turning over the small clues he had gathered. Shipping labels, scars along the horse's flank, inconsistent paperwork, the nervous flinch when another human passed too close. Patterns emerged, subtle but undeniable. The horse had not merely been rejected. It had been misunderstood, mishandled, judged by superficial measures, and cast aside by a system incapable of empathy. He knelt by the animal as the shadows lengthened, brushing the coarse hairs gently along its neck, feeling beneath the surface for the scars that told more than words ever could. The horse shivered under his touch, but it did not pull away. Its eyes, wide and cautious, held a silent question, one that demanded he act, that asked whether he would uphold the fragile thread of trust between them. And in that moment, the rancher realized the depth of what he faced. The world had been cruel, indifferent, and sometimes willfully blind. But here, in this frost-bitten paddock, a single act of steadfast care might be enough to counter years of neglect. Night settled over the farm with a quiet intensity. The barn lay in shadow, the horse resting unevenly, its breath clouding in the cold air, and the rancher, notebook open and lamp dim, mapped the threads of the story he was beginning to piece together. There were questions yet unanswered. The precise reason for the mislabeling, the hand that had chosen to discard rather than care, the system that permitted such errors without consequence. Each unanswered question sharpened the tension in his chest, but also hardened his resolve. By the candlelight, he jotted notes, cross-referencing letters, shipment records, and the horse's own marks. The creature's resilience mirrored his own, a quiet but insistent challenge, to confront error, to demand accountability, and to protect what the world had deemed unworthy. The wind outside rattled the loose barn boards, a low, persistent whisper that seemed almost to echo the same question he could not yet answer. Could compassion truly overcome neglect, or would this horse, like so many before it, vanish into a world too indifferent to notice? As he closed his notebook and rose, the horse shifted, lifting its head and meeting his gaze. No words passed between them, but in the stillness, a pact formed. The rancher would not walk away, would not allow bureaucracy or cruelty to dictate fate. And though the path forward was uncertain, fraught with confrontation and moral reckoning, one truth had become impossible to ignore. Some lives, no matter how overlooked or misjudged, were worth fighting for. The morning broke pale and brittle, the sun a thin smear of gold across the horizon. The rancher stood by the barn gate, the cold stiff in his bones, hands pressed against rough timber, eyes fixed on the narrow ribbon of road that led to the breeder's estate. He had made the call the night before, traced every document, every label, every notation that proved the horse's mislabeling. Evidence stacked in neat piles on his table. Yet he knew it would take more than facts to stir the conscience of those who had turned indifference into policy. The horse waited just behind him, ears forward, eyes bright and alert, its breath clouding in the morning air. For a moment, the rancher let himself simply watch, the muscles beneath its coarse coat flexing as it shifted weight from hoof to hoof, the subtle lift of a tail, the small curiosity in its gaze. He had seen the spark of trust grow, fragile yet persistent, in the quiet hours spent feeding and tending, and it steadied him. This was not just a matter of principle. It was the culmination of patience, vigilance, and a refusal to accept injustice as immutable. The road carried the sound of an approaching carriage, wheels clattering over frost-hardened dirt. He stepped forward, coat brushing against the wooden gate, and straightened, shoulders squared. When the carriage drew close, a man of precise dress and stern countenance stepped down, holding a clipboard and the weight of authority like a shield. His voice was clipped, polite, but devoid of warmth. "I received your correspondence," he said, glancing briefly at the barn, at the horse, at the rancher, "though I fail to see why this is your concern." The rancher met his gaze steadily. "Because this horse was sent here in error," he said, voice measured, deliberate. "It was labeled unsellable. That label was wrong, and it deserves what every living creature deserves: care, dignity, and a chance to live." A thin silence followed. The horse shifted behind him, nudging the ground with a hoof, as though punctuating the truth in the quietest way possible. The man's eyes flicked toward it, a subtle tension threading through the brief exchange, but pride and habit made him slow to yield. Documents were presented, each piece of evidence laid out with care: shipment records, the trail of correspondence, the marks on the horse itself, photographs of bruises and scars, detailed notes of care taken by the rancher over the past weeks. Each fact was undeniable. Slowly, the tension shifted, a tightening of the man's jaw, a subtle exhale, the recognition of error creeping into his posture. He had built walls of policy, but here was something that no protocol could dismiss: a creature who had endured neglect, who had survived by instinct, and a man who had risked everything for it. In the stillness, the moral truth was undeniable. The breeder hesitated, then nodded once, sharply. "It appears the error is ours," he admitted. "The horse belongs where it has been cared for." A weight lifted from the rancher's shoulders, though not all at once. He exhaled slowly, letting the recognition settle. Outside, the horse stepped forward, head high, muscles moving with a grace that had been hidden beneath neglect. When the rancher reached out, it approached him without hesitation, nuzzling the hand that had fed and tended it. The gesture was small, but it carried a lifetime of trust built in hours and days, in patience and persistence. By afternoon, the barn was alive with the quiet rhythm of work, the rake scraping the floor, hooves crunching against the dirt, the soft murmur of the wind through the timbers. The horse moved freely in the paddock, ears pricked, coat gleaming faintly under the late sun. The rancher watched, a subtle warmth threading through the tension that had gripped him for so long. He had fought not with anger, but with unwavering care, proving that justice need not come with violence to be absolute. Evening settled over the farm, pale light spilling across the fence line, reflecting in the horse's eyes. The rancher sat on the rail, coat drawn tightly, and for the first time in weeks, felt the quiet of accomplishment, the calm of rightness restored. This was not triumph in the usual sense. There were no celebrations, no fanfare, but a deeper victory, measured in trust gained, wounds healed, and the fragile life of a creature once discarded now allowed to flourish. Some lessons come only to those who refuse to give up. He did not know how far this horse's spirit would carry him, nor where the quiet acts of patience might lead. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long amber shadows across the frost-hardened paddock, he understood one immutable truth: compassion, persistence, and courage, even in the face of indifference, could overturn the cruelty of neglect. The horse nudged him again, soft and insistent, and he whispered, almost to himself, "We'll make it together." And in the gathering dusk, as the barn settled into shadow and the wind whispered through the timbers, a fragile, enduring peace claimed the farm. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts below.